The billionaire wife acted poor to test her husband's loyalty. But when he chose a mistress and filed for divorce, he had no idea the woman he called nothing owned the ground he was standing on. Emily Whitmore stood in a simple beige dress, no diamonds, no designer label, no trace of the billionaire empire that carried her maiden name, but behind her calm eyes was a fortune powerful enough to erase a city skyline. For 2 years of marriage, she played the role of the struggling wife, the woman cutting coupons, selling her car, apologizing for failed investments, all to test the one thing money could never buy: her husband's loyalty. Daniel Whitmore once swore he didn't care about wealth. He said he married her for love, not status. He promised he would stand beside her whether she was rich or poor. But when the bills grew tighter and the lifestyle shrank, his patience thinned, and a younger, glamorous mistress with expensive tastes began appearing at his side. He told his billionaire wife she had become small. He told his poor wife he deserved more. He told his mistress he was meant for greatness. But what Daniel didn't know, what the mistress didn't know, was that every sacrifice, every downgrade, every quiet humiliation, had been part of a deliberate test. A billionaire wife pretending to be poor, husband choosing a mistress over loyalty, a divorce signed with steady hands, and a woman powerful enough to make them regret everything. But why would a billionaire risk her marriage just to test her husband? How long had she been planning this? And when the truth finally surfaced, who would lose more, the husband who betrayed her, or the mistress who thought she had won? Daniel Whitmore cleared his throat as he slid the divorce papers across the dining table. "You were nothing when I married you," he said, voice controlled, almost polished. "And you'll be nothing without me." The suburban house around them was modest, deliberately so. Neutral walls, second-hand dining set, no art worth more than a few $100s. The kind of home that whispered middle-class caution. But this house was a stage, and Emily Whitmore had designed every inch of it. She looked at the signature line, her fingers steady. Her nails were unpainted. The thin silver band on her hand was the only jewelry she wore. To Daniel, she looked like a woman who had slowly failed at life. He didn't see the discipline in her posture, the unconscious authority she had trained into her spine during boardroom wars. Across from her sat Sophie Langford. Sophie was polished in ways Emily intentionally was not. Cream silk blouse, gold bracelet, red lipstick. A pair of red roses rested in a crystal vase beside her. Daniel had brought them earlier, placing them there with theatrical finality. Emily hated red roses. Years ago, when Daniel first brought them during dating, she had mentioned softly, "I prefer white lila." He had forgotten. But forgetting small things often reveals bigger truths. "Say something," Daniel pressed. Emily lifted her eyes to him. In that moment, she saw clearly what she had once admired: ambition, charm, hunger. But hunger without integrity becomes appetite. "You're sure?" she asked quietly. "I deserve growth," he replied. "I can't live small forever." Live small. The words echoed against a memory 12 years old. A glass conference table, Manhattan skyline behind it. Men twice her age questioning her right to inherit Carter Global Holdings after her father's stroke. "You're too young," one had said. "This is a multi-billion-dollar corporation." She had been 20-4. She had worn no diamonds that day either. Only resolve. Richard Carter, her father, had raised her differently from other heirs. No private jets at 16. No trust fund indulgence. At 14, she worked in a Carter warehouse under an alias, stacking freight boxes until her palms blistered. "Money," her father used to say, "is loud. Character is quiet. Learn the quiet first." When he collapsed from a stroke, the board tried to vote her out within weeks. She didn't cry, she outperformed. Within 5 years, she expanded Carter Global into a integrated logistics, increasing valuation by 240%. She removed 3 board members who underestimated her. Not emotionally, strategically. That was when she learned something irreversible: power reveals people, but poverty exposes them. Back in the present, Sophie shifted uncomfortably. "Daniel, maybe we should—" "No," Daniel cut in. "She needs to hear this." "Hear what?" That he had already transferred joint savings into his personal account. That he had secured private investors under the assumption he would soon upgrade his life. He thought he was stepping toward success. He didn't realize he was stepping into a vacuum. Emily signed the document. The scratch of ink was soft. Final. Outside. Her phone vibrated in her handbag. She didn't look at it yet, but she knew who it was. Marcus Hale, CFO of Carter Global. The only executive who knew the full experiment. 2 years ago, before she stepped down publicly as CEO. She had met Marcus in her corner office. "I need anonymity," she told him. "You're risking perception," he warned. "I'm risking something more important." He understood. All controlling shares were placed into a blind trust. Public announcements framed her resignation as personal restructuring. Marcus became acting CEO. The media cycle moved on within weeks. Daniel never questioned it deeply, because the downgrade had come gradually. First, the penthouse sold, market timing, she said. Then the luxury car replaced with a sedan, better mileage, then smaller vacations, fewer dinners out, each step engineered. Each step observed. And in those quiet reductions, Daniel changed. Late nights, no cologne, gym membership, password on his phone. Foreshadowing always whispers before it screams. Emily rose from the table. Sophie intertwined her fingers with Daniel's. Emily noticed the detail, not with jealousy, but with confirmation. "You'll manage," Daniel said, almost kindly. "You always do." He believed she was dependent. She picked up her handbag. Her phone buzzed again. This time she glanced. One message. "Marcus, acquisition finalized. Awaiting your signal. Langford Luxury Group." Sophie's employer. A company Carter Global had been silently acquiring shares in for 18 months, long before Sophie entered the picture. Strategic alignment. No coincidence. Emily locked her phone and looked at Daniel one last time. "You're right," she said calmly. He mistook her composure for resignation. He did not recognize relief, because the test was complete. As she walked out of the house, Daniel felt something flicker in his chest. Not guilt, not yet, something colder, like stepping off solid ground, and realizing too late that it had never been solid at all. Daniel told himself the divorce felt lighter than he expected. As Emily's car disappeared down the street, he stood at the doorway longer than necessary, hands in his pockets, watching the empty road as if something might come rushing back. Sophie touched his arm gently. Her nails were manicured, pale pink, the kind that required maintenance Emily had never bothered with. "You did the right thing," Sophie said. "You can finally breathe." Daniel nodded, but the breath didn't come easily. He had spent years convincing himself that he was a man meant for more. Even as a boy, growing up in a narrow townhouse with parents who argued over bills, he had promised himself he would never live cautiously. His father had worked hard but never advanced. His mother had learned to make peace with disappointment. Daniel hated that peace. He wanted momentum, proof, visible success. That hunger had followed him into adulthood. Business school, networking events, always scanning rooms for opportunity. When he met Emily, she seemed refreshingly uncomplicated, intelligent, supportive, modest. No flashy demands, no extravagant expectations. He told himself that was love, but love, he later decided, shouldn't feel like sacrifice. Sophie had entered his life quietly, a glance at a corporate mixer, a shared laugh over champagne. She noticed his watch, his tailored suit, the confidence he wore like armor. She assumed wealth because he spoke like a man who expected it. Daniel never corrected her. He enjoyed the way her eyes lit up when he talked about future ventures. Now, standing in the emptied house, Sophie walked through the rooms as if measuring them. "You really lived like this?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. "It was temporary," Daniel replied too quickly. Emily had setbacks. Investments went wrong. Sophie hummed, unconvinced, but she smiled anyway. "Well, that chapter's over." Later that evening, after Sophie left, Daniel poured himself a drink and opened his laptop. He reviewed emails from potential investors, men who had once seemed impressed, now suddenly distant. One message stood out. "We'll need updated financial disclosures now that your marital situation has changed. He shut the laptop harder than necessary. Across the city, Emily sat alone in a quiet apartment she had rented under a different name. It was minimalist, intentional. No artwork, no luxury. Only a single framed photograph on the desk. Her father, younger, smiling beside a cargo ship bearing the Carter Global logo. She remembered the night she decided to test Daniel. They had been newly married. Lying in bed, when he casually remarked, "Some people are lucky enough to marry into wealth. Everything just opens up for them." She had laughed then, lightly, but the comment lodged itself deep, not because of greed but because of expectation. Now, she removed her shoes, rolled her shoulders, and finally checked her phone. Marcus had sent another message. Langford bored unaware. Transition clean. Emily closed her eyes briefly. Sophie. Langford believed she was climbing. Daniel believed he was escaping. Neither realized they were moving exactly where she needed them. She poured a glass of water instead of wine. A habit formed during years of disciplined control. Tomorrow, she would attend a Carter Global Strategy call remotely, unseen, unheard. The pieces were aligning, just as they always had when patience outweighed impulse. Emily looked out the window at the city lights. Power didn't announce itself. It waited. And soon, waiting would be over. Sophie liked restaurants with high ceilings and reflective surfaces, places where glass walls overlooked the city and every table glowed under soft gold light. She believed environments revealed status, and status revealed destiny. Daniel sat across from her at one of those restaurants 3 nights after the divorce filing. The skyline shimmered behind them, and for the first time in months, he felt aligned with the version of himself he preferred: the rising man, the strategic man, the man not held back by small living. To new beginnings, Sophie said, lifting her champagne flute. To growth, Daniel replied. He enjoyed the way she watched him when he spoke about expansion, about future ventures, about scaling operations. He used words he had learned in business school and polished through years of networking. Sophie leaned in every time he mentioned partnerships, capital, opportunity. She did not ask for proof. She asked for projections. Sophie had grown up in a family where appearance mattered more than stability. Her father once ran a boutique investment firm that collapsed quietly after a series of risky trades. The lesson she absorbed wasn't caution, it was presentation. Never look like you're losing. Always align with momentum. She learned early that proximity to power could rebuild what inheritance lost. Daniel looked like momentum. What happens next? She asked. I'm finalizing investor commitments, he said. Now that I'm not tied down, I can move freely. Tied down. The phrase lingered in the air. Across the city, in a private conference room no one associated with her anymore, Emily watched a live financial dashboard projected onto a wall. Carter Global Holdings acquisition percentages for Langford Luxury Group ticked upward in precise increments. Marcus Hale stood beside the screen. We crossed 61% this morning, he said quietly. Board transition can be initiated at 70. Emily folded her hands. Sophie had no idea that the company logo printed on her business cards was slowly becoming property of the woman she had replaced, not revenge. Timing. Emily remembered the first time she visited Carter Global's primary warehouse at 14. Workers hadn't known who she was. She wore steel-toed boots and carried freight manifests under a false surname. A supervisor had once told her, if you want respect here, earn it. She did. That memory returned whenever she questioned her experiment with Daniel. She had not tested him impulsively. She tested him because she had seen what unchecked wealth did to marriages among her father's peers, alliances based on advantage, loyalty based on dividends. She wanted proof that love could survive contraction. Instead, contraction revealed fracture. Her phone vibrated softly. A forwarded message from a mutual acquaintance. Daniel and Sophie spotted at Altura Skyline Restaurant. Photo attached. Emily looked at the image. Daniel smiling. Sophie radiant. Crystal glasses reflecting city lights. Altura. She and Daniel had once celebrated their first anniversary there back when she still maintained the illusion of moderate comfort instead of visible struggle. Interesting, Marcus murmured, noticing the restaurant in the background. Let them enjoy the view, Emily said calmly. The higher the altitude, the thinner the air. Meanwhile, Daniel leaned back in his chair. I'm meeting potential partners next week, he told Sophie. They'll want to see that I'm established. And you are, Sophie replied. You just needed the right alignment. Alignment. Neither of them realized that alignment had already been decided, just not by them. As dessert arrived, Daniel's phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number. He ignored it. Across the table, Sophie smiled. But her eyes flickered briefly to the screen. Opportunity always comes with conditions. Neither of them had read the fine print yet. The morning after Daniel's meeting at Altura, he returned to the Whitmore townhouse with a sense of triumph, unaware that the subtle fractures of his carefully constructed life were already widening. He poured himself coffee, black, and scrolled through emails. Each message carried potential, investors, partners, side deals. Every number, every chart, every proposal felt like validation. Sophie's presence had amplified it. Her smile, her nods, Her whispered encouragements, they weren't just support, they were mirrors reflecting the version of himself he wanted to believe existed. Sophie noticed his rhythm. "You work too hard," she said, adjusting the cuff of her silk blouse. "Even now, the way you analyze numbers, the way your eyes flick to charts. It's almost obsessive." Daniel laughed lightly, brushing it off. "I've always been meticulous. You should know by now." Sophie had known him for barely weeks, yet she already understood the unspoken hunger, the unquenchable drive that could never be satiated by comfort or approval. Her own upbringing had taught her to read ambition like a map. Her father's collapse had left her with a rule she never forgot: power is borrowed unless seized intentionally. That knowledge had guided her in reading Daniel before he even realized she was studying him. Across town, Emily sipped water in the quiet of her apartment, eyes fixed on the stock tickers scrolling across her tablet. Carter Global's control of Langford Luxury Group had crossed 65%. Marcus Hale, ever precise, had warned, "The board will notice sudden voting patterns if we go too fast. The optics matter." Emily nodded, recalling the first time she had orchestrated a major acquisition alone. At 27, her father had been gravely ill, the board resistant. "Patience," he had said, adjusting her collar. "Observe, calculate, and strike only when your target least expects it." She had learned then that wealth was useless without control. Influence required subtlety, and patience demanded endurance. She applied that lesson to Daniel, to Sophie, to the facade she maintained, the perfect illusion of a wife struggling, of wealth gone unnoticed, while silently orchestrating a net of leverage that no one, not even her husband, could see. Back at the townhouse, Daniel's phone buzzed with Sophie's messages, meeting times, restaurant confirmations, client follow-ups. He smiled. "Everything aligns," he murmured, almost to himself. Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Aligns, or feels like alignment because you want it to." Her voice was teasing, but her gaze lingered on him in that way that suggested she was calculating the entire room, the view, the possibilities. That phrase echoed in Emily's memory. Years ago, a young Emily had overheard her father tell a board member, "Alignment is an illusion if you don't know the pieces." She had nodded quietly in the shadows, absorbing the lesson. Even when all seems balanced, the unseen forces always determine the outcome. Daniel leaned back in his chair, unaware that Emily had set those forces in motion. He believed control had shifted to him, that moving freely meant no consequence. But that belief was precisely what she needed him to think. Every confident stride, every slick negotiation, every shared glance with Sophie was a step into a carefully prepared narrative she would reveal at the perfect moment. And somewhere deep in the network of emails, trust funds, blind acquisitions, and silent corporate maneuvers, Emily smiled faintly. The city below sparkled with opportunity and ignorance alike. The people who thought themselves in control had no idea who was writing the rules or when they would change. A new email notification flashed across her screen. Daniel Whitmore Langford proposal. She didn't open it yet. She let it sit. Timing was everything. Daniel Whitmore stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Whitmore townhouse, arms crossed, staring at the city below. He had just returned from a meeting with high-profile investors, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a faint smile. Sophie's words echoed in his mind. You just needed the right alignment. He believed she was right. He had freed himself from the smallness that had held him back, and now, the city was his playground. Daniel. Sophie's voice cut softly through the apartment. She stood near the kitchen counter, checking her phone. Her designer heels clicked lightly against the hardwood. Have you considered what comes next after the Langford acquisition? Daniel turned, brushing a hand through his hair. Of course, expansion, new markets, investor meetings. The world doesn't wait for hesitation. His tone was confident, almost smug. Sophie's gaze lingered on him. She noticed the twitch of impatience in his jaw, the way his eyes darted to financial apps even while speaking. She smiled faintly, approval mixed with calculation. Growing up, she had watched her father's boutique firm collapse silently, teaching her early that ambition unchecked by perception could crumble quickly. She had learned to see the cracks before they became chasms, and she had learned to step in subtly. Meanwhile, across town, Emily Whitmore observed the Langford Luxury Group stock chart on her tablet. She leaned back in her chair, recalling a memory from her youth. At 14, she had walked through the primary Carter Global warehouse in steel-toed boots, manifest in hand, unnoticed by the staff. She remembered a supervisor muttering, "Respect isn't given, it's earned." and how she had taken those words to heart. Every movement now, the silent acquisition, the gradual transfer of shares, the blind trust was a calculated echo of that lesson. Marcus Hale approached her quietly. The Langford board hasn't noticed unusual voting patterns yet. Should we prepare the press release strategy? Emily nodded slowly. Not yet. Timing matters more than speed. Daniel thinks he's moving freely. That's good. Let him think the chessboard belongs to him. Back at the townhouse, Daniel poured himself a drink, glancing again at his phone. He didn't notice the subtle vibration of anxiety beneath his confidence. A miscalculation in his assumption, Sophie's loyalty, Emily's disappearance from public life. The blind trust he had never suspected was already setting the stage for consequences he couldn't predict. Sophie leaned closer, lowering her voice. You look tense, Daniel. Are you sure everything's aligned? Aligned enough, he replied, though his fingers drummed lightly against the counter. He didn't admit it, but the faint echo of doubt was creeping in. Emily, far away, thought of Daniel's first boasts after their lifestyle downgrade. I can't live small. She had let him believe smallness was failure, but it was merely the test medium. The bigger reveal would not be financial, it would be character, loyalty, and consequence. Every late-night call, every hidden investment, every strategic conversation had been observed. Every choice Daniel made in Sophie's orbit was a step into her carefully orchestrated design. A soft ping on Emily's tablet caught her attention. Daniel had sent a message. Langford proposal approved. Ready to sign. She smiled faintly, leaning back. Timing was perfect. The first move in her public strategy would be subtle, precise, and devastating, not out of vengeance, but to reveal truth. And Daniel, full of hubris, had no idea the ground beneath him was already shifting. Daniel sat in the sleek glass conference room of Langford Luxury Group, flipping through the final draft of the acquisition agreement. Sophie leaned over his shoulder, pointing to clauses he had already skimmed. Check the termination clause again. Make sure nothing's hidden. We don't want surprises, she said, voice calm but precise. Daniel smiled, brushing off the caution. Emily wouldn't interfere. She's out of the picture. She's irrelevant. Sophie's lips curved slightly, but her eyes flickered to his hand, where the wedding band had once been. She didn't comment, but the glance carried quiet calculation. She had learned early that subtle observation revealed far more than conversation. Her mother had always said, the one who underestimates what's invisible is already defeated. Far away, Emily Whitmore observed the city from her high-rise apartment. She sipped her water and recalled a memory from her first public acquisition at 27. Her father had whispered in her ear while she signed the paperwork, remember, Emily, perception is everything. Let them believe they control the board while you control the moves behind it. She had never forgotten those words. Marcus Hale appeared behind her, tablet in hand. Daniel's preparing the Langford signing. He seems confident to confident. Should we move the next phase? Emily nodded. Wait for his signature. Then release subtle corporate communications. Let him think it's his win. Let him believe Sophie secured it. Watch how ambition blinds him. Back in the Langford boardroom, Daniel adjusted his tie, completely unaware that every movement, every confident word, had already been anticipated. Sophie studied the fine print on the documents, noticing a minor discrepancy she could have raised but chose not to. She knew it would create just enough friction to keep Daniel alert but not suspicious. Everything's perfect, Daniel said aloud, tapping the table. Langford is mine. Everything aligns now. Sophie hesitated. Are you sure alignment is real? Or just what you want to see? Daniel chuckled, brushing the question aside. It's real. It has to be. Emily, observing silently through market reports, smirked faintly. She remembered Daniel's early remarks during their marriage. I can't live small. He had believed smallness was misery. She had let him believe he was struggling beside her while secretly orchestrating a web of influence he couldn't detect. In her mind, the final pieces were coming together. The Langford acquisition was only the beginning. Daniel's overconfidence, Sophie's calculated ambitions, and their assumption that Emily had vanished from relevance were all part of the illusion. Marcus interjected. Emily, the press release is scheduled for 10 a.m. You want us to wait? She shook her head. No. Let the news trickle. Let them notice discrepancies in their assumptions. Subtlety will make them unravel faster than confrontation. Daniel leaned back in his chair at Langford, unaware that the acquisition he thought was a victory was a step deeper into a trap designed not for revenge but for revelation. The subtle cracks were forming the first signs of instability in Sophie's ambitions, the early tremors of Daniel's overconfidence. He raised his glass in a silent toast to what he believed was success. Somewhere across town, Emily watched the city lights flicker against the glass, knowing that every light was a pawn moving exactly where she needed it to. And soon, Daniel and Sophie would learn that control was an illusion, and ambition alone could not withstand the patient hand of someone who had built an empire from nothing and never forgotten the lessons of loyalty, character, and timing. Daniel's confidence wavered the next morning, though he refused to admit it. Sitting in the corner office of a Langford boardroom, he scrolled through investor updates, emails, and projections. Every number was precise, every report glowing, but something gnawed at him, a subtle friction he couldn't name. Sophie watched quietly, perched on the edge of a leather chair, her notebook open, pen poised. "You're distracted," she said softly, tilting her head. "Is everything all right with the Langford integration?" Daniel shook his head, forcing a smile. "No, it's fine. Just details. Adjustments." Sophie didn't press. She had grown up learning to watch the small things. A hesitation in tone, a flicker in posture, a hand brushing absent-mindedly over documents. Her father's firm had collapsed silently because he ignored the tiny tremors before a disaster struck. She wasn't about to make the same mistake. Meanwhile, Emily Whitmore leaned against her window, watching the morning city hum to life. She recalled her own lessons in observing ambition and hubris. At 21, during her MBA, she had overheard a competitor sneer, "She's just the heiress. She won't last." She had smiled, silently memorizing every misstep they made while she quietly outperformed them. That memory anchored her patience now. Daniel's overconfidence and Sophie's calculated energy were precisely the cracks she had been waiting for. Marcus Hale approached Emily with a tablet. "Daniel is requesting a meeting with Langford executives today. He seems anxious." Emily smirked faintly. "Perfect. Let him believe he's regaining control. Subtle anxiety will push him to make decisions he thinks are strategic but actually predictable." Back at Langford, Daniel entered a glass-walled conference room with Sophie at his side. Several executives greeted him with smiles, but there was a quiet tension in the air he hadn't anticipated. Something about the way they answered questions, the way their eyes lingered on certain clauses in the contract, it was all too rehearsed, too careful. "Daniel, before we proceed, we need clarification on some minor discrepancies in the terms," one executive said. "Nothing major, but we need alignment." Daniel waved a hand dismissively. "I've reviewed everything. It's perfect. Alignment is exactly what I need." Sophie leaned closer and whispered, "Alignment isn't the same as certainty. Watch carefully." The phrase echoed in Daniel's mind. He frowned. Uncertainty had always been dangerous to him. He remembered his first failed investment after college. He had rushed, ignored advice, assumed control, and lost nearly half his savings. He thought that lesson was behind him, but now a quiet dread crept in. Emily, monitoring from afar, allowed herself a small smile. She remembered Daniel's repeated insistence during their poverty experiment. "I can't live small." He had believed smallness was weakness, but it had revealed more than she ever could have imagined. His priorities, his vulnerabilities, his susceptibility to perception. The first ripple had begun. Sophie didn't yet know that Emily was orchestrating it. Daniel thought he was steering the course, but small inconsistencies, minor delays, and unexpected clarifications were already forming a pattern that would trap them both. And in the quiet of her apartment, Emily tapped her fingers lightly against the table. Timing, patience, and observation would turn their confidence into miscalculation. By the time the reality of her wealth and strategy emerged, both Daniel and Sophie would understand that the test wasn't over. It had only just begun. The city's midday sun streamed through the glass facade of Carter Global's newly leased satellite office. Emily Whitmore sat at a sleek desk, her tablet open, reviewing a draft press statement designed to appear innocuous. To the casual observer, it was a standard corporate announcement: strategic partnerships, market expansion, executive commentary. But every line had been calibrated, every phrase weighted with subtle implication, every omission intentional. Marcus Hale leaned against the desk. "Are you sure this will provoke the right response?" Emily didn't look up. "Not provoke, reveal. Timing matters. Daniel and Sophie think they're in control. They're not ready to see the next move, but they will be." She recalled a memory from her father's study when she was 16. He had been negotiating with a rival company for hours, his voice calm, precise. "Force isn't necessary. Influence is quiet. Patience is lethal." Emily had memorized every gesture, every calculated pause. Those lessons now dictated the rhythm of her actions. Back at Langford, Daniel was reviewing projected profit margins when Sophie's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her brow furrowed slightly. Daniel noticed but didn't comment. He had grown used to reading minor fluctuations in her expression, but this one didn't match her usual cues. Everything okay? He asked. Sophie hesitated. Just a note from a stakeholder. Nothing major, but they're curious about recent board changes. Daniel waved it off. We've disclosed everything necessary. No surprises. Emily, observing the city from a nearby window, allowed herself a faint smile. She had planted the information subtly in the public domain, phrasing it as routine corporate procedure, yet the ripple effect was already reaching Langford executives. They were questioning decisions Daniel believed were irreversible, tracing them back to a mysterious consultant whose influence seemed to appear overnight. She remembered the first time she had orchestrated a similar strategy at Carter Global. She had been 27, negotiating quietly while the board assumed she was preoccupied with personal matters. They didn't see her working behind the scenes until the company's stock surged unexpectedly. The satisfaction wasn't in the victory, it was in their realization of it. At Langford, Daniel's eyes darted between spreadsheets and emails. Sophie noticed the tension creeping into his posture, the subtle tapping of his fingers against the glass table. "You're overextending," she whispered. "I'm not," Daniel replied sharply, though doubt crept into his voice. He had spent months believing he was untouchable, and now that belief was being tested in ways he hadn't anticipated. Emily leaned back, watching through live market feeds. She remembered Daniel's careless assumptions during their experiment, his fixation on material wealth, his dismissal of loyalty, his blind trust in perception over reality. Each had been a lesson for her, and now each was being applied in reverse. A notification pinged on her tablet. Langford board inquiry. Clarification requested. Perfect. The first ripple was real. Daniel's confidence was faltering. Sophie's influence, previously untouchable, was becoming reactive. And Emily, invisible to the world, controlled the next sequence of moves. She smiled faintly, recalling the final lesson her father had drilled into her: patience exposes ambition. Time reveals truth. The game had begun in earnest, and Daniel and Sophie had no idea they were already playing on her terms. The first cracks were subtle, almost imperceptible, but Daniel Whitmore noticed them immediately. During a Langford executive meeting, charts he had memorized began to shift in unexpected ways. Numbers that once aligned perfectly now suggested discrepancies. Sophie, sitting beside him, raised an eyebrow but remained silent, letting Daniel feel the instability before she intervened. "I don't understand," Daniel muttered, running a hand over his forehead. "These projections were final. How is this possible?" Sophie's lips pressed together. "Perhaps there's a delay in reporting, or an error in the data entry. I'll follow up." Daniel nodded, but the unease in his chest had already taken root. He remembered a lesson he had learned long ago from his father, buried beneath years of ambition. Small mistakes compound into irreversible losses if ignored. He had ignored those lessons once as a young entrepreneur, and now the subtle tremors whispered that history was repeating itself. Across the city, Emily Whitmore sipped coffee, eyes scanning livestock feeds. She remembered the exact moment, years ago, when she had first realized the power of observation over force. At Carter Global, a rival executive had assumed control of a negotiation by speaking first. Emily had stayed silent, letting the moment unfold while she calculated the silent advantage. When the dust settled, she had seized the opening they never saw coming. She allowed herself a faint smile. The same principle now applied. Daniel's overconfidence had blinded him. Sophie's calculated support had created the illusion of security. And Emily's quiet, invisible hand was already shifting the balance. Back at Langford, Daniel leaned back in his chair, tension radiating from every muscle. "This can't be right. I've double-checked everything." Sophie touched his arm lightly. "Maybe it's not about what's right or wrong, Daniel. Maybe it's about who's controlling the perception." Her voice was soft but deliberate. Daniel glanced at her, irritation flickering across his face. "You think this is some kind of game?" Sophie hesitated. "Not a game. Observation. Observation." The word lodged in Daniel's mind, echoing faintly like a warning he couldn't place. Emily tapped a series of notes into her tablet. Each action, each subtle press release, each strategic delay, was calculated to provoke just enough doubt to destabilize Daniel's certainty. She remembered his exact words when he had claimed he could not live small, when he had judged her as powerless. Every boast, every choice he had made in Sophie's orbit, had built the framework for this very moment. Daniel's phone buzzed. An alert from the board, discrepancies flagged. He froze, realizing that a meeting had been scheduled for him to explain anomalies he could not yet trace. Sophie leaned in. Don't panic. Think strategically. Panic. A feeling he rarely allowed himself. Yet here it was, creeping in despite his years of ambition. Emily watched the clock, knowing the timing was perfect. She recalled the night she had decided to test Daniel's loyalty, the night she had begun dismantling the illusions of marriage and comfort. 2 years of careful observation, of hidden wealth, of silent control, were culminating now. And when Daniel and Sophie arrived at the board meeting, they would find that nothing was truly theirs, not power, not perception, not alignment. Every move they believed was theirs had already been anticipated, countered, and inverted. The stage was set. The final act was near. The boardroom was silent, tension hanging like smoke. Daniel Whitmore entered with Sophie at his side, confidence still clinging to him like armor, but cracks were already visible. Every executive's gaze lingered on him a fraction too long, every question measured, every nod cautious. He didn't yet realize the foundation of control he had assumed was slipping beneath his feet. Emily Whitmore stood at the rear of the room, invisible to everyone but Marcus Hale, observing the spectacle she had orchestrated for months. 2 years of planning, of silent acquisitions, of strategic patience, were about to bear fruit. She remembered the night she had first decided to test Daniel's loyalty, how he had promised love, yet revealed priorities when confronted with perceived loss. She had watched, silently, as ambition and ego clouded judgment. Mr. Whitmore, the board chairman began, we've reviewed the Langford acquisition. There are several discrepancies that require clarification. Daniel's chest tightened. Discrepancies? What discrepancies? Sophie shifted beside him, her expression carefully neutral. Perhaps we should go over the documents line by line. Daniel's fingers trembled slightly as he opened his laptop. Numbers, charts, agreements all aligned in his memory now seemed skewed. Small errors, subtle misalignments. Nothing catastrophic individually, but collectively they painted a picture of instability. Emily allowed herself a faint smile. The ripples she had created in the public domain, the subtle press releases, the timed shareholder communications, all of it had led to this moment. She remembered the warehouse at 14, the first lesson in observing without being seen, and she knew Daniel would now fully experience the power of that principle. Mr. Whitmore, the chairman continued, voice firm, it appears that Carter Global has quietly acquired controlling shares in Langford Luxury Group. Daniel froze. Every confidence, every assumption, collapsed in an instant. Sophie's eyes widened, realization dawning. That's impossible, she whispered. Emily stepped forward, her calm authority filling the room. It's true, she said, voice steady. Langford Luxury Group is now under Carter Global's control. Daniel, Sophie, every move you believed you controlled was observed and anticipated. This wasn't about punishment, it was about revealing truth. Daniel's face paled. He glanced at Sophie, whose ambition now clashed with panic. You. What? How? Why didn't we know? You assumed I was gone. You assumed my wealth and influence were irrelevant. Emily replied softly. I acted poor to test loyalty. You failed. You chose comfort and appearance over integrity. Sophie, ambition without awareness is just a tool in someone else's hands. Sophie's voice wavered. I thought we were building something together. Emily's gaze softened, tinged with quiet authority. You were building nothing that mattered. Control requires patience, observation, and understanding, qualities you both underestimated. Daniel's mind raced, recalling every boast, every dismissal, every choice he had made, believing he was untouchable. The world he thought he controlled was now a stage, and he had been the unwitting actor. Emily turned, addressing the board. Langford Luxury Group's transition is complete. Daniel and Sophie can retain positions if they choose, but the truth cannot be ignored. Loyalty, integrity, and perception matter more than ambition alone. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Daniel and Sophie stood frozen, their ambition stripped bare, exposed to the consequences of their choices. Outside, the city continued its hum, oblivious to the private collapse and revelation inside the glass walls. Emily looked out at the skyline, the calm of victory tempered by years of discipline. The billionaire who had once pretended to be poor had revealed more than wealth, she had revealed character. Daniel swallowed hard, a lesson learned too late. Sophie's ambition faltered, her confidence shattered. Emily Whitmore, quiet, precise, and checkable, had made them regret everything while showing the world, and herself, that true power had never been about money alone. The test was complete. And for Daniel and Sophie, the cost of underestimating loyalty, patience, and foresight had finally come due.